I'm definitely not the first person to say that Rolex is like the Apple of watches. You know, it might be because of their insane brand recognition. The fact that they managed to move units selling for a price that's much higher than their other competitors that might offer better value on paper, but somehow they still manage to sell for more. But I think there's one trait that these two companies share that I think demonstrates that Rolex really is the Apple of watches. Hi everyone and welcome to Shaluso, and yes, today we are talking about why Rolex is the Apple of watches. Now, I'm definitely not the first person to correlate these two brands. Like I said in the intro, you know, they're both brands that are easily recognizable, that are representative of their industries, that have created icons, that generate a lot of hype every time a new release comes out, that sell for much more than their competitors, despite maybe not being as technically advanced as their competitors. They have a ton in common. But I think there's one key factor that most people tend to gloss over that these two have in common. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. And that is the way in which they don't necessarily invent things. They're not actually the first to do certain things, but instead they set the template for how things are done within their respective industries. Most people look at Apple as an extremely innovative company. You know, they invent things, right? They're the first. This is not really the case. Look at something like the personal computer, the idea of like that all-in-one like you have with the iMac. Yeah, they didn't invent that. As far back as around 1970, you had the Data Point 2200, which was a pretty similar concept. You know, it had a CRT screen and everything sort of crammed into one main unit plus peripherals. That really didn't take off for Apple until 1998's iMac. Now that's sort of been the staple for them, and other companies have followed that format as well. Another example is the MP3 player. That was invented in 1997. iPod didn't come out till 2001, so it was by no way the first MP3 player. And the iPhone, they were by far not the first to invent the touchscreen phone. In 1993, IBM had something called the Simon, which was also touchscreen based. But none of these firsts really took off. And what Apple did is they reinvented it. They put things together to make them more user-friendly and more market-friendly. And that's something that Rolex does as well. So today I'm going to be talking about 3 examples of that, as well as correlating them to parallels within Apple. And one of the first examples of this is the Oyster case, the notion of the waterproof wristwatch. Most people think that the 1926 Oyster was the world's first waterproof wristwatch, but that's misleading at best. While it did pioneer the combination of a lot of these technologies, screw-down crown, screw-in case backs, rubber gaskets, all of these things had been done on wristwatches as well as pocket watches, particularly as far back as the 1850s. What Hans Wilsdorf did in 1926 is he put a lot of these different technologies and approaches together to make a wristwatch that was waterproof. But it wasn't a case of them really developing something for the very first time or anything particularly new. It was taking existing things and simply putting them together in a way that hadn't been done before to make something that was better. And now, of course, the rest is history. That sets the template for pretty much any watch that claims to be water resistant. It's not something that we look at as a feature, we look at it as part of the definition of the segment. And the Oyster case is one of the first examples of that. Rolex took existing technologies, existing ideas, but it presented them and packaged them in a way that was different to the others, and most importantly, that was more appealing to the market, such to the point it became the template for the future. The second example is the Rolex Calibre 4130, released in 2000. It was Rolex's first in-house chronograph caliber, and this was of course in the Daytona, replacing the 4030, which was based on the El Primero. Now again, this featured nothing new in terms of invention. The chronograph had been around for centuries. The column wheel and the vertical clutch both had been around for the better part of a century and were both the older, more traditional way of doing a chronograph. That architecture of having a vertical clutch, a column wheel, and a 70-hour power reserve set the blueprint for the 21st century chronograph. Breitling B01, Heuer 02, Omega 9900 series, all of these calibers can easily trace a direct lineage to that approach of creating a chronograph. All of them were benchmarked to move towards that milestone and that yardstick set out by the 4130. On top of that, the 4130 also has much fewer parts than your usual chronograph. which means that it's more reliable in the long term because there's less to go wrong. And also, it was crucially thinner than most integrated chronographs, and that helped the Daytona be a thinner overall watch, and that in itself meant that it was more appealing. It helped the Daytona be more appealing because it wasn't a big chunky watch. It was nice and slim, it was more elegant. So again, it set the template for what we expect in modern chronograph, and that's what other brands have followed. Much in the same way that the iPhone didn't really actually invent anything particularly new. Instead, what they did is they set a new template that brands like Samsung, like HTC, Huawei, all those other phone brands, they had to follow it. They set the benchmark, not by inventing, but instead by reshaping and rearranging certain innovations to make something that was better for the market. And then the last example is the ring command bezel. And again, another thing that wasn't particularly invented by Rolex actually. As far back as 2002, there was a company called Vogart which had started working on a system that allowed the bezel to interact directly with the movement, in that case for a time zone function. Then in 2007, we got the Yachtmaster 2, which combined the ring command system to a regatta timer. Now that may have had its success at the beginning, but these days the Yachtmaster 2 is one of the watches that's easiest to find in an authorized dealer at retail because no one really likes it anymore. In that, it wasn't really their biggest success considering what they invented. However, in 2012, that changed with the release of the Sky Dweller. And again, we have a parallel with Apple because the iPhone wasn't even Apple's first attempt at this notion of sort of a big touchscreen phone organizer type of thing. In 1993, they released the Newton. And the reason why you probably haven't heard much about it is because it was a flop. They killed the project after 5 years in 1998 and didn't revive it until 2007 with the iPhone. So again, there's that parallel of even when they did try and do something a little bit earlier, it doesn't always work. But the second time around it did. The Sky Dweller, instead of connecting to a complication that, let's be honest, not very many people can relate to, it connected to two of the most useful complications, an annual calendar and a dual time. And this was a great success for them. It used what they learned from the ring command, but to be able to manage multiple complications. Because there's only so many different positions you can move a crown, but with a bezel, the opportunities are endless. It means they don't need to worry about adding either big button pushers or even little micro pushers that you have to use a toothpick for to adjust an annual calendar, for example. Instead, it's all done through the bezel. This means they can keep everything standardized. It's easy to use, it's intuitive. I've handled 2 Sky Dwellers in my reviews, and both of them, I never had to practice very much. It's very easy to understand how they work. And while yes, this notion of using the bezel hasn't caught on yet in the same way as the iPhone did right away, we're starting to see examples of it, like with the 2016 IWC Time Zoner, which brought back that Vogart idea of using the bezel to control a time zone. But it's still fundamentally that principle that if you have a complication, you can use the bezel to manage that complication instead of a crown, especially if it's something you want to do on the go. So this simplicity, this ability to make things that are easy for people to relate to and that are user-friendly and more ergonomic, I think is a big strength of Rolex. It's something they don't get a lot of credit for. Everyone talks about Rolex in terms of resale value, brand value, and more resale value. But if you look at them as a brand, it's not just about that. What they produce, they don't have to invent things. They just present them better. And that's, I think, part of their genius and part of their appeal, in addition to, of course, their history, in addition to things they did invent, in addition to the fact that, yes, they do sell for more than retail, but also I think it's very important to recognize what one of their biggest strengths is, and that is their ability to make something that is easy to use and that is appealing on a technical level as much as an aesthetic or a financial level. But in any case, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of some of these innovations? What do you think of Rolex as a company, looking at it from the perspective of they're kind of like the Apple of watches? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below, and also let me know what's your favorite innovation or improvement that Rolex has made or introduced. Love to know your thoughts in the comments below. And of course, if you like this video, make sure you like it and share it. If you want to see more pictures and infographics of watches, make sure you follow me on Instagram at Shaluso. If you want to see more videos of watches, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell as well so you know when the next video comes out. In any case, thanks for watching this video, and we'll catch you on the next one.